go here again. Now we go to another interesting article here. Ooh, this good year before things really pop off. Okay, the spiritual bases, right, of the Japanese imperial idea. The signing of the Anti-Comintern Pact, right, November 6, 1937. The Tripartite Pact, September 1940, by Italy, Germany, and Japan, provided occasions to emphasize the common political interests they presupposed. Almost no one, however, thought to discuss them from the perspective of worldview, spirituality, or traditional principles in order to see what extent there was also a certain convergence here. On the contrary, to most people, this assumption seemed absurd. Most people consider Japan another world, which will always remain closed to our mentality. People believe that its state and its tradition are the result of a mentality that no bridge can connect to Western man's way of thinking. To a large extent, this is a mistake. It is an opinion that can be true only from an imperialist viewpoint, the viewpoint of people who believe that nothing exists beyond what is conditioned by the naturalistic element, whether geographic, ethnic, or racist in the narrow sense. Wherever there exists a traditional culture in the highest sense of this term, there is always something superior to all this, something potentially universal, which in its diverse elements reveals the different expressions of a unique content. Japan is amongst the most traditional cultures that still exist. If a lack of understanding exists between some Western cultures and the Japanese, the cause does not proceed so much from a difference of race as from the fact that the latter, the Western cultures, find themselves outside of tradition. That is, they are the product of a profane and anti-traditional spirit, a situation which puts them in opposition not only to Eastern cultures, but also to every normal and higher culture of our own Western past. It is in fact essential to acknowledge that even if it does not so inform as appropriate for a different race and environment, Japan still firmly defends values today that in the West, and the contingencies of its history, has lost, and can only hope to regain in future developments stemming from restorative revolutions. On this terrain, there can well be a convergence, but representing an open challenge to every evolved and modern political ideology by holding firmly to transcendent and anti-secular significance. Even in the political and governmental order, Japan can in a certain way work for us as a type of reagent, can help us to overcome compromises imposed by necessity, and it can spur our spiritual courage and point out to us the new paths to the summit. Similarly, we find it useful to hint at the Japanese political idea, which is only superficially known to most people. The political and national idea of Japan, right, Mato Damashi, can be summed up in calling the imperial tradition divine. Following the command, I shall descend from heaven, the patriarch of the Japanese sovereign says in the Kojiki, the chief text of Japanese tradition. These sovereigns are not considered human beings. They form a unity with the solar goddess Amaterasu Omikami on the basis of an archaic and uninterrupted dynastic and spiritual tradition. But even historically, the Japanese dynasty has a continuity of over 2,000 years. Here, the act of governing and ruling is united with cult. It is at one and the same time a rite, a religious act. The word Matsurigoto means both government in the strict sense, that is temporal power, and cult, the exercise of religious things. The ambiguity is full of significance because it refers to the unbreakable synthesis between spiritual authority and temporal power in a single person, a synthesis that belongs to all primordial traditional cultures, including Rome. Japan is therefore the only contemporary state that finds itself in this happy condition of knowing nothing of the problem, the reconciliation between the national and racial idea and the religious idea. In Japan, religion is politics and politics is religion. The Japanese religion, Shintoism, has Kuigi as its cornerstone. That is absolute fidelity to the emperor, the exact equivalent of what was Fides, I'm probably mispronouncing this, in the Roman and Germanic Ghibelline Middle Ages, and to a certain degree in ancient Rome. The religious duty is also dissolved in fidelity before the state, because in Japan the state is not a human creation, but has a divine basis. At its center, there is nothing that is more than a man, even if, as the texts inform us, it does not have the character of an absolute god of the monotheistic type. Since this is the only reference point for the piety of the individual, the result is that every virtue or act of this individual or collective life ends with justifying itself in terms of, I would say, fides, right? Fides, transcendent fidelity, right? The chief, right? Kyugi. Fidelity and loyalty in Japan are therefore concepts that are valid not only in the warrior and chivalric sphere, but include respect for parents, solidarity between relatives or friends, the practice of virtue, respect for the laws, harmony between spouses with a proper hierarchical relationship between the sexes, productivity in the field of industry and the economy, work and study, the task of forming one's own character, and the defense of blood and race. All of this is fidelity. And in the last instance, fidelity before the sovereign. Every antisocial, immoral, and criminal act on this basis does not signify the transgression of an abstract norm, or more or less anodyne or conventional social law. No, it is treason, disloyalty, and ignominy comparable to what rebounds on a warrior who deserts his post or betrays the commitment covenanted by him in a manly fashion with his chief. They are therefore not criminals, but rather traitors, beings incapable of honor. It is interesting to note that this kind of view, which is still alive and well in Japan, reflects what every other traditional culture of East and West originally knew but then lost. It is now reappearing again in fascism and National Socialism. In these movements, too, there is a growing tendency to give a basis that is ethical and virile, and therefore anti-positivist to the notion of the rule of law, of social morality, and moreover of liability and responsibility. However, unlike Japan, in our country, we do not have the supreme religious reference point, which is established in Japanese tradition to the supernatural character of the imperial function. The Japanese sovereign possesses the character, even more than for his descent, which is considered non-human, as we mentioned, reaches back to prehistoric epochs, and also because of the triple treasure, Sanshu no Jingi, emblems of divine power, mirror, pearl, and sword. There is no coronation or investiture ceremony in Japan. The new sovereign becomes emperor when he assumes the triple treasure, an act that marks and seals his right from above. The traditions that refer to this are so ancient that their original meaning survives only in fragmentary and unclear form, even in Japan itself. What should we really think, for instance, about the relationship that exists between the sovereign and the female divinity of the sun? It is not easy to deal here with a problem like this one, which anyhow we have already discussed earlier. We should only say that the physical sun functions here as a symbol for a spiritual reality by means of a transcendent solarity. The fact that this force is conceived of as being female could probably be explained like many heroic myths, where symbolic women, queens, or female divinities play a significant role and lead beings who are especially gifted and tested to the regal function. The symbolism means that in respect to spiritual, celestial, and solar power, the sovereign, by assuming the function and maintaining himself also as a man, has to preserve the affirmative and supremely royal quality that man has before woman in every normal relationship. This is precisely the opposite of the Semitic attitude of servility before the divine. The relationship of identity, moreover, is emphasized by the first object of the imperial triple treasure, the mirror, and which is called Yata no Kagami, that is, august spirit. There is a solar force in this, as in a magic presence. Therefore, the mirror invites the sovereign to acknowledge his true image, that is, to always be aware of his identity in relation to the solar force. There are two aspects to consider about the second symbol, the sword. The first, exoteric one, corresponds more or less to the meaning that the sword has had everywhere as an emblem of the temporal power. Moreover, in Japan, it is a reference to the ability to discriminate between good and evil, real and unreal, so as to be able to be a just judge on earth. Nonetheless, the second aspect of the symbolism in question, a more secret and esoteric aspect, will give a sort of metaphysical foundation to this ability. The myth, in fact, says that the sword was originally brandished to kill the dragon with 8 heads, of the brother of the solar goddess. I think that's Orichi, Orichi. We cannot deal here with the symbolism of this event and of the number 8 that occurs therein. We shall only say again that there is a reference to a supernatural achievement which presupposes the destruction of lower telluric influences on different levels of conditioned existence. As for the power of the stone or pearl of stone, Tama, from the outer viewpoint it refers to Buddhism, which knows the mystic pearl of compassion in the highest sense of understanding of human sentiment, of greatness and openness of mind. in Sanskrit, Mahatma. The Japanese word tama, however, also means soul or divinity, and the symbolism of the celestial stone eventually takes us rather far back in time. The Grail itself in Wolfram von Essenbach's text appears as a divine or celestial stone, lapis excolio, right? Closely connected to the idea of a transcendent kingdom, while the ancient English tradition knows the so-called stone of destiny, liafail, which has played a part in the consecration of legitimate kings since prehistoric times. We easily find more similar references. In general, a sacred stone appears everywhere a center is established of a traditional organization. In the highest sense, that this is almost in the sense of a world center. We can recall the omphalos of Delphi and even the papal allegory of Pete as the rock, right, Pietra, in the Gospels. As we said, the transcendent nature of sovereignty, marked with these symbols of the triple pleasure, constitute the cornerstone of the entire Japanese doctrine of empire and is still valid as dogma. These words are part of the commentary of Prince Ito Hirobumi on the Japanese constitution. The sacred throne was created when the earth parted from the sky, i.e. as a sort of surrogate for the degeneration of an existing primordial unity of the terrestrial and divine. The sovereign descends from heaven and is divine and sacred. In the official text Kokutai no Hongi that was recently published by the Japanese Ministry of National Education, the same idea is found, but in a yet more radical formulation. We shall report some points in Marenga's translation. The sovereigns of Japan descend from a solar goddess. Japan has always been ruled by a single dynasty. It is a unique country in a world without peers. The goddess is present in the imperial mirror of the temple of Ise. The three symbols of power have been delivered by the goddess. The rule of the empire is divine. The sovereigns are visible divinities. They are different from the rulers of any other nation because they are not chosen by the people. The act of governing the nation is identical to that of paying homage to the gods according to Shinto rites. The sovereign is the people. They are the same thing. Loyalty to the sovereign is the basis of all morality. All this is the official ideology of the state. It is the basis of the particular national sentiment. It is the foundation of the ideals and virtues of every Japanese. It is the weapon used to fight materialism, individualism, collectivism, and especially Bolshevism, which is correctly considered as the extreme antithesis of the Japanese political idea. It is the deep source of every heroic act and every sacrifice. It is the faith, the soul of the Yamato race. In 1935, Professor Minobi made himself leader of an attempt at Enlightenment reform. He wanted to make of the throne a simple branch of government and therefore to constitutionalize and positivize the institution of the monarchy. This unleashed a most violent reaction in the soul of the Japanese and especially in the army. The divine nature and the origin of the sovereign was once again solemnly affirmed. Yeah, I'm sure. The principle according to which the sovereign is the people has almost racial basis. The dynasty is considered as the original stock from which arise or derive the principal lines of the Japanese race. Thus, the nation is conceived as the single large family or gens in the ancient sense. This myth cements the pride and solidarity that racism seeks to arouse in us today, since it gives an almost patriarchal hue to Japanese loyalty on the foundation. Loyalty on this foundation is almost pieties. It is not exhausted in the free act of the individual. It is the duty of the blood. Naturally, this sentiment is especially alive among the elements closest to the imperial summit, that is, the bushi, or samurai, who constitute the warrior feudal class conceived as the flower of Japanese society, according to the ancient proverb. What the cherry is among blossoms, so is the bushi among men. The organizations of the samurai are bushi into a true caste in which the traits between ascetic and military of our ancient chivalric orders are precisely reflected dates back to about 1500 years ago. The doctrine that is their soul and law, the Bushido, is however rather older and harmonizes with the idea of the Japanese state. As the foundation of a precise ethical, social, spiritual, and even biological norms, it has been faithfully handed down from generation to generation to our own days. The caste is the jealous guardian of the tradition. Just as it is loyal unto death to the sovereign, it is equally so to the dogma of divine regality, which today, as in centuries past, it is ready to defend against any profanation or secularization. The doctrine of Bushido, like the doctrine of the old Western chivalry, does not concern only the profession of arms, and so it would be a mistake to consider the samurai as a simple military caste, but involves the entire tenor of life. It is the way of being that essentially corresponds to a race of the spirit beyond the race of blood. Aside from the supreme norms of loyalty stronger than life or death, Bushido contains the formation of the warrior, but in a special sense, which is hardly accessible to the contemporary European mentality, which easily confuses the warrior with the soldier and always associates it with the idea of something hard, rigid, and closed. An essential element of the way of the Bushi, however, is the interiorizing of heroism and force, the victory over one's nature that is fundamental for refinement, nobility, style, and beauty, as all this is conceived in Japan. The Bushi, therefore, is traditionally practiced in the domination of his own thoughts and sentiments, of his own intensiveness and passionate nature, until he reaches an asceticism that is sui generis. Moreover, even today, the Bushido is not foreign to the practice and disciples of Zen, which is one of the most esoteric schools of Buddhism, with its own methods of controlling and awakening deep human energies which border on the occult, while always emphasizing the demand that every materialization, for instance, the profession of arms and the Japanese way of fighting, jujitsu, be understood as a symbol and foundation for a spiritual realization. As on the one hand, there is the strictest law of honor, the scrupulous care to avoid even the slightest stain casting a shadow on the family to which the samurai belongs, so on the other hand, there is the idea of a subtle, inflexible, and unfathomable force of dominion, which flees any theatrical and narcissistic exhibition and any vanity, and recalls the teachings of Lao Tzu about the action that is not material action, wei wu wei, and because of its invisibility is irresistible. People in Italy who seriously defend the idea of a total education, especially with reference to the problems of future elites, cannot view the aspects of Japanese culture with indifference. They should rather acknowledge that the West, for centuries now, using the excuse of dominating nature and matter, has almost completely abandoned the task of ruling themselves. That in the West, serious mistakes often subsist about what manliness really means, which is unilaterally confused with its coarsest, muscular, or violently volunteerist forms, that because of unfortunate circumstances, the asceticism that has been acknowledged, most especially in the West, is an asceticism of the religious type that is self-abnegating and contemplative, not the asceticism that can integrate, enhance, and transform a warrior vacation and an aristocratic ethics. To the degree to which there is a serious intention to overcome all these limitations with a truly integral, viral education, ideas very close to those of the Bushido seem to us far from foreign and extraneous, but instead present a special character of relevance for the spiritual vanguard of our own movements of restoration. Finally, a last point. Starting from the center, which is constituted by the dynasty, and radiating outward through veins constituted by the great Bushi families, the transcendent conception of the Japanese state will reach all the remaining elements of the nation and then step by step permeate the entire national society with the same meaning. All Japan, therefore, feels itself as the bearer of a divine force and as a unique race, which has a universal mission that is irreducible to any demand of what is only material. Oh, that's nice, huh? This is not an old, obsolete phrase. Amongst the verses that every Japanese student learns in today's schools from a tender age are found, for instance, the following: Japan is the only divine land. The Japanese people are the only divine people, and therefore Japan can be the light of the world. Whoa, that sounds like another people. The well-known politician Yosuke Matsuoka, who recently represented his country at the League of Nations, oh God, remember them? Expressed himself as follows: I am convinced the mission of the Yamato race, the Japanese, is to protect the human race from hell, to safeguard it from destruction, and to lead it to the world of clarity. And to stop the gamelons. All right, enough. I'm making a joke. This is serious. So it actually is pretty serious. Here we ourselves face a myth, a force idea intended to create a high degree of tension in a people. Bingo. As Rudolf Walter has mentioned, the notion of a chosen people and a supranational mission are in reality very far constituting a solely Japanese patrimony. Yeah, no kidding. The same sentiment is found wherever a people has been pervaded by a metaphysical sense, to which behind the human forces that belong to it, forces from on high are also acting. Well, maybe with another. Anyway, thus we are dealing with a faith that the Aryan races also possessed, and if we want to find an equivalent in the West, no less august than the Japanese, for antiquity we need only remember the Roman symbol, the secular faith in Aeternitas Romae, and the supranational and universal mission of the Roman race. Today, these correspondences do not lack a precise meaning. Once the most contingent part of Japanese ideology, its exclusivism, has been separated, what remains as its central nucleus is the idea of a struggle that is justified not only by ambitions of material power and political reason, but also by an idea, a mission, and a vocation of spiritual dominion, and basically by a transcending reference point. In one form or another, the insights of this sort are being affirmed with increasing clarity in the struggle being fought today to limit the power of other myths and vocations. Japan can find itself with us, and especially with the conscious advocates of the Roman imperial tradition, on the same front, which is not only political, material, and military, but also spiritual and ideal. The ethnic and naturalistic differences here cannot mask the undeniable convergence in the themes of the traditional spirit except to the eyes of the myopic. Those who know how to preserve this spirit from remote epochs can join together to fight beside those who are trying to reconquer it after having overcome the decadence, disintegration, and darkness that has characterized the pseudo-civilization of the modern world. Boo. Oh, if it wasn't for the modern world, you couldn't film this. Ah, well, come on. Yeah, very interesting. Very cool.